Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good evening and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. Usually we do the Hindu analysis every day live at 10 a.m. in the morning. But unfortunately we faced a few technical difficulties today and the session had to be rescheduled to 5 p.m. So apologies for the inconvenience. But don't worry, at any cost, we will continue to strive to bring the Hindu analysis to you every single day. So before we start the analysis, if you guys are benefiting from our initiatives, do press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's begin the analysis of the Hindu newspaper by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 7 important articles for a detailed analysis. We have 4 articles that are very important for the mains exam. So here I'll ensure we'll go beyond the article, cover some related background and related topics as well, so that even if there is a prelims question related to it, you should be able to answer them. And we have 3 small articles which are exclusively for your prelims. So before we begin, we have a very important announcement. Today at 7 p.m., as part of the last lap series that we have started to help you quickly revise some important topics for the upcoming prelims, I shall be taking up a very important session from international relations where I'll be discussing some of the most important conventions and treaties that have been in the news over the last couple of years. I'll not only cover some of the IR related conventions and treaties, but will also focus on environment and economy related conventions, treaties, agreements, protocols, etc. So do join me live again at 7 p.m. In a short session. I'll help you cover as many topics as possible. And this should help you in the final lap of your preparation for the upcoming prelims examination. And also please note that our new online English classroom batches have just started, along with the bilingual English batch. And Unacademy is providing a great offer to help you enroll for this program, to ensure that these classes are affordable to everyone. The price has been dropped to just 25,000 rupees, and today is the last day of the offer as the new batch has just begun. And if you want to enroll for the program at this price, do call us, and today midnight is the last duration of this offer. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of the Hindu by looking at this important column from page number 13. This article deals with the topic of exit polls. During the recent elections, exit polls made a lot of headlines. As the election results were about to come, several media outlets, various think tanks, etc., they all brought out their predictions through what we call as exit polls. I'm sure many of you would have noticed that most of the exit polls, they projected a landslide victory for the NDA, the BJP-led NDA coalition. There were few exit polls that projected anywhere between 350 to 400 seats. There were few exit polls which were very confident that NDA coalition could even cross the 400 mark. But however, when the results came on the 4th of June, it turned out to be completely contradictory to what the exit polls had predicted. This even led to a complete crash in the stock market initially, and it even triggered a lot of uproar and criticism against these exit polls. So this article will help us understand what exactly are exit polls, how is it different from an opinion poll, how exactly are these exit polls conducted, what's the methodology that is adopted by various media outlets and think tanks when they conduct an exit poll, and what are the regulations regarding exit polls and opinion polls. What's the criticism and how can this be addressed? So all these topics can be understood in detail by taking a look at this article. So first, let me explain in brief what is an exit poll. I am sure many of you would already know what exactly is an exit poll, but I believe that there could be many beginners as well. So keeping them in mind, I would like to start from the beginning, start with the very basic. Exit polls are essentially surveys or sample surveys which are conducted right outside the polling booth or right after the election, right after the voting has taken place, in order to capture the mood of the electorate. A sample size amongst the electorate is chosen by the media outlets or the think tanks which are conducting these exercises. So it is essentially a sampling survey. So out of the entire electorate, a sample size is chosen at select constituencies in select states, and the pollsters, they try to ensure that there is as much representation as possible to ensure that the data collected is as wide and representative so that they can come up with as accurate predictions as possible. So essentially, the voters who would have just cast their vote in the polling station, who are walking out, they would be met by these pollsters or those who are part of the survey exercise, and they will pose a questionnaire to the voter who is stepping out from the polling booth. The idea here is to pose such questions to the voter so that they can discreetly inform as to which candidate or which party did they cast their vote for. So by collecting this data at the ground level, it is compiled, collated, and statistically it is scaled and weighed to provide projections regarding vote share, and as well as convert that into seat share and predict the possible number of seats that could be won by different political parties which are contesting in that particular election. So that exactly is an exit poll. It is conducted right when the voter is exiting from the polling station, and that is the reason why it's called an exit poll. This is very different from an opinion poll. Opinion polls can be conducted anytime, usually before the elections, to gauge the mood of the electorate, to understand the political preferences and the political choices of the voters. Opinion polls can be conducted anytime. Usually it is done prior to the elections to signify or to bring out the overall mood of the electorate. But exit polls happen right after elections, immediately after voting takes place, as the voter is exiting the polling booth. That is when the pollsters pose these questions and discreetly collect the data from the sample size that has been chosen, and they will apply few statistical sampling methods to come out with a poll projection, to project which party, which candidate might win, how many seats, what is the vote share. So this essentially is a media-driven exercise, driven by newspapers or TV news channels in association with few think tanks and civil society organizations. Now, what is the regulation with regard to exit polls and opinion polls in the country? Is it regulated, and why should it be regulated? See, opinion polls and even exit polls, if they are not conducted properly, if they are released during the wrong time, it can have an adverse impact on elections. It can unduly influence the voters. If, let's say, exit poll results are released during the election cycle itself, even before the results, when different phases of polling is taking place. Imagine if exit polls are brought out by media outlets. So let's say in the first 2-3 phases of voting, let's say exit polls are saying that a certain party is winning or a certain leader is likely to become the prime minister. Then in the other phases, in other constituencies where elections are yet to happen, this could unduly influence the voter, because they might feel, if this party or this leader is obviously going to win, then why should I waste my vote and let me cast my vote to the same leader or to the same party? So this could exercise undue influence on the minds of the voters, and this could disrupt the conduct of free and fair elections. Similarly, opinion polls as well, if the data is not accurate or if there is deliberate manipulation of the projections, this could exercise undue influence on the minds of the voters, and it could change the voting preferences. It could change the voting choices. So as a result, it's very important to regulate opinion polls and exit polls in particular. So the Election Commission of India would be the designated authority to regulate opinion polls and exit polls. It can issue notifications, guidelines, and even ban or prohibit these exit and opinion polls from being conducted. The legal backing for this comes from the RPA, the Representation of the People's Act 1951. Under the RPA, we have section 126A that specifically deals with exit polls. This provision of RPA states that exit polls cannot be published before the final phase of voting is completed. This is a prohibition placed by the Representation of the People's Act. It ensures that no media outlet or no think tank can publish the exit poll results. They can conduct the exit poll. Obviously, it has to be conducted right after voting, immediately when the voter is exiting the polling booth. The poll can be done, the back-end exercise can be conducted, but the final results should not be published. The projected results should not be published by any outlet unless and until all the phases of voting is completed. That's why those who are conducting exit polls, they wait for the final phase to be completed and only then the results are published. So this is a prohibition placed by the RPA. If anyone violates this, right, then the Election Commission of India can take appropriate action against such agencies, media outlets and entities which are breaking the law. The punishment includes imprisonment with jail as well, with a jail term of up to 2 years with a penalty. So this attracts a penal provision, and Election Commission can act against those who are violating the RPA, those who are publishing exit poll projections before the completion of the election cycle, and they can be punished with an imprisonment that includes a jail term along with a fine. Now the Election Commission has specified that no radio TV broadcast or no newspaper article should bring out the exit poll projections prior to the conclusion of the elections. And similarly, there are other regulations as well regarding opinion polls and exit polls. From time to time, the ECI issues few guidelines and notifications, especially when elections are scheduled. When the elections have already been notified, the Election Commission will bring out fresh notifications regarding how exactly when exit and opinion polls can be conducted and how exactly the results can be published. So any violations will attract a strict penal provision according to the law. Now, let's understand what exactly is the methodology. How is this sampling and statistical exercise conducted, and where do the pollsters go wrong? Because we've seen in many instances, in several state assembly elections, you take the West Bengal assembly election, last year's Karnataka assembly election, many exit polls got it completely wrong. And it was not by a small margin, but a diametrically opposite prediction was provided by some of the exit polls, but the actual results turns out to be something else. So how can there be such a huge contradiction, right? Which essentially means that there's something wrong with the methodology itself, with the parameters that are being gauged by these pollsters. So let's quickly understand what exactly is the methodology, what parameters are captured through these exit polls and these surveys. See, first and foremost, a sample size is chosen amongst the electorate. Now, if you take out national elections in India, the total voter base is around close to 100 crores, around 96 to 100 crores. So out of the entire voting population, a small sample size is chosen, because obviously no media outlet or no think tank can reach out to every single voter. It's practically impossible. So they will select a sampling size, and they will ensure that the sample size is as wide and representative as possible. They will try to capture the answers from all age groups possible, because the voting choice of a 20-year-old would be different from the voting choice of a 40-year-old. And that would be different from the voting choice of a 60-year-old. So it's important to ensure that there is age-wise representation as well. Similarly, social representation has to be ensured. Voters from different communities, the majority community, the minorities, religious minorities, Dalits, the lower castes. So there should be adequate representation which provides a representation for the social profile of that country. Then gender-based representation. Adequate number of male and female voters have to be approached by the pollsters to collect the answers from them. Then also, if you look at the voting pattern of urban voters and rural voters, it's entirely different. So capturing sufficient number of urban and rural votes is also very crucial. So by keeping all these parameters in mind, the right sampling size is chosen. The best possible sampling size is chosen by the respective agency or institution which is conducting the exit poll. Usually around 15 to 20,000 voters are selected. What they do is they get hold of the electoral roll, which is published by the Election Commission, and they look at the constituency-wise data from different states, and they will ensure that there is gender, urban, rural, social and age-based representation, thus ensuring the widest possible sample size. Next is the questionnaire. What question will they ask? This is very critical. The question can't be very explicit and it can't push the voter to reveal the vote that they have cast, because that would violate the secrecy of the ballot. The questionnaire should be discreet. If the voter wishes to provide the answer regarding which party, which candidate they voted for, the answer should be collected in a discreet manner. The pollster who's asking the question should not get to know as to what was the choice of the voter. It has to be kept discreet, and the entire questionnaire process is a very crucial part of the exercise. What questions will be asked, how will it be framed, and how will the answers be collected in a discreet manner? How will you ensure that voters give the most honest answer possible? Because there is a possibility that the voters might lie. They might have cast a vote for party A, but they might lie to the pollster saying we put a vote for party B. Because there might be an inherent fear that if tomorrow the data is released, the other party or the other candidate, right, whom they didn't vote for, might target the voter as well. So there could be a possibility where voters might lie about it, or voters may refuse to give the answer if they feel uncomfortable with the kind of question, right, and with the entire questionnaire process. They may not give the right answer. They might even just say that I would not like to comment, or I don't have an opinion, or I didn't cast to any of the candidate. I just used the nota option. So to ensure that the right answer is brought out and the most honest answer is brought out, the questionnaire has to be properly designed and the answer has to be discreetly collected. This is also very crucial as part of the exit poll process. Next, a statistical method is applied. The small sample data now has to be scaled. It has to be weighted for the larger population. So this has to be proportionately applied to represent the wider population and the demographic profile of the constituency, of the state and the country, right? So a scaling weighting exercise is used, which is a statistical exercise. And through this, the survey will arrive at the vote share of different candidates and different parties. They will also account for the trends, the established trends in a state or in a constituency, because there would be certain traditional trends that exist. For example, one candidate would keep on winning elections because he has a very favorable vote base, irrespective of what work he has done or not, right? Or irrespective of which party he belongs to, one candidate can keep winning elections. So that is an established historical trend. In some other constituency, there could be a regular anti-incumbency, where every time the voters have cast out the incumbent and brought in a new representative. So those historical trends are also computed, and finally the projections are brought out, which gives you the vote share. Then again, by using statistical formulas, the vote share is converted into the number of seats. But of course, there is always a margin of error. Any agency which is conducting the exit poll, right, they will never say that this is the exact number of seats that we are expecting. This is the exact vote share that we are expecting. They'll always bring a error margin, maybe plus or minus 2%, plus or minus 3%. This error margin should be within acceptable limits. Is that clear? So this essentially is how the exit poll is conducted. Now, the challenges here, right, where the pollsters might go wrong, where these agencies might go wrong, is with the sampling size itself. Of course, the sampling size has to be chosen randomly to ensure that there is no bias. Any kind of bias should be eliminated by choosing the sample size as randomly as possible. So they get hold of the electoral rolls published by the Election Commission, and they'll try to ensure that random voters are chosen, but there should be adequate representation for different class and group of voters. Ensure that there is age-wise representation, gender-based representation. Then represent the social profile, the religious distribution, caste-based distribution, right? These factors play a critical role in determining the election results, because eventually voters do cast vote on religious lines, caste-based lines, etc. So ensuring that the sample size is as stratified as possible, as diverse, as wide as possible, and as representative as possible is very important. Next is the questionnaire. Ensure that you conduct the interview in a non-hostile, friendly manner. The question itself has to be properly designed. It should entice the voter to give out the most honest and the right answer possible. Because this is a challenge. You can never determine whether the voter gave a deliberate wrong answer, or they were concealing the actual vote that they casted, or were they trying to mislead. That can never be very clear. So the best possible thing the surveyors can do is to ensure that the questionnaire is properly designed, the right questions are asked, and the replies collected in a discreet manner. So this is extremely crucial to get the best possible answer, the most honest answers from the voters. Then finally, the last step where the surveyors go wrong, where these agencies go wrong, is with regard to the projection that they do, the statistical method they apply. They have to scale this data relative to the proportion of the population, the percentage of women in a given constituency, the percentage of religious minorities, proportion of Dalits and lower castes in a constituency, right? By using the small sample size, let's say they have got the response of only 50 women voters in a given state. Now, how will you scale this to the entire state or to the national level? For that, you need to take the demographic information and proportionately in relative size to the population of that group, it has to be scaled, it has to be weighted. This statistical exercise has to be as accurate as possible and as close to the real numbers as possible. Now, this is very, very crucial. This is where again many agencies go completely wrong. And also factoring in the historical trends is very critical. You can't blindly go by the survey which has been conducted and the statistical method which is being employed. You should factor in the local elements, the historical trends, and then provide the best possible projection with a decent and an acceptable error margin. So this is exactly how exit polls are prepared, but these agencies, these surveyors, they go wrong in many steps. Either they go completely wrong with the sampling size itself. It's not as varied, stratified and representative. They go wrong with the questionnaire and the way in which the answers are getting collected. They go wrong with the statistical projections, right? So finally, they arrive at the vote share and they try to convert this into seat share. So in these projections and calculations, they might go wrong. They fail to factor in the undercurrent that exists, the historical trends that are present. So when this is not done properly, that is when the exit poll results would be completely opposite of what actually happens in the final results. Usually, when there is a one-sided contest, let's say for example, there is a particular state and there is a strong anti-incumbency and it's widely expected that the opposition is going to come back into power. In such cases, which is a one-sided contest, usually exit polls get it right. If not the exact seat numbers, at least the vote share with a small error margin, or at least the broad trend that this party is going to win, that this coalition is going to form the government. At least the broad trends are got right by these, they are gotten right by these surveyors. But when the contest becomes very close, when it is a tight contest, that is where exit polls go completely haywire. If you remember the results that was brought out on 4th of June by Election Commission of India, it appeared that the election results would turn out to be a tight contest eventually between the India Alliance and the NDA. Of course, the NDA comfortably sailed over the majority mark and arrived at a total of 293 seats. But there was a point where it appeared to be a very tight contest, and indeed in many constituencies it was a tight contest between the two sides. So in such cases, that is where exit polls go completely wrong. Because of the flawed methodology, the wrong assumptions they would have made, the wrong statistical parameters they have applied, they get it completely wrong, and this is where it can be very misleading. Now, this could have adverse consequences as well. Of course, thanks to the regulatory guidelines implemented by the Election Commission through the RPA, right now, no media, no agency publishes exit polls during the elections, right? They are legally bound to wait until the final phase of the voting is completed. So there is no fear of any undue influence on the voter. But however, the broader impact on the psyche of the voter, the broader impact on the stock markets, because let's say exit polls are predicting a certain result and something else happens on the actual result day, this could lead to wild swings and fluctuations in the stock markets, especially in important states, large states, or in the case of national elections. And this could have very serious economic consequences. So this is where concern comes up regarding the integrity of exit polls, the methodology that they are using. So based on this, there could be a possible question asked by UPSC in mains. Let's take a practice question. I'll provide a structure as well for the answer, and you can use this to write a model answer for this question. So let's look at the question. What are opinion polls and exit polls? Discuss their regulation and the controversy surrounding them. So you can begin with an introduction. It's always very important to build a good structure into your answer. UPSC expects you to structure your points, and UPSC expects the aspirants to ensure that there is a logical flow of thought. So begin the answer directly by talking about opinion polls and exit polls, because that is the first question here. What are opinion polls and exit polls? Explain the two. Give the definition of opinion polls and exit polls as we discussed. Maybe you can draw a small table as well. List a couple of points to clearly highlight the differences between opinion polls and exit polls. Next, talk about the regulation that exists in the body. Talk about the regulation of these exit polls and opinion polls. Mention the Representation of People Act, the role of the Election Commission, the guidelines that exist, what happens in case of violations, what's the punishment. Next, talk about the controversy. Discuss how these poll projections can go wrong and what adverse impact it might have. Also talk about the undue effect it might have on the voters, the undue influence it might exercise if it is published at the wrong time in violation of the established rules, how it could impact the stock markets and in general the political atmosphere. So discuss the criticism, the controversy, point out where exit polls might go wrong. You can briefly mention the process followed, the parameters which are captured, and point out the flawed methodology where the surveyors might get it wrong. And finally, conclude your answer with a way forward. In the conclusion, you need to mention, you can suggest, for example, that exit polls per se are not entirely wrong, right? Even though they get the projections way off the mark. What needs to be done is that they should stop predicting the number of seats. Nobody can predict the number of seats. It is impossible. Just like you can't predict the share price of a particular stock, right? No one can do that. Not even that company or not even the biggest shareholder in that company can exactly predict what would be the share price. This is pure speculation. So they have to stop giving out exact seats. Maybe they have to stick to broad trends. Stick to the broad trends. Maybe bring out the vote share, because with the right sampling exercise, you can actually get the vote share right with, of course, a small error margin. Maybe with a plus or minus 2 to 3% error margin, that is still fine, which is acceptable in any statistical exercise. Bring out only the vote share and more importantly, bring out the broad trends. But don't go into the exact number of seats, which could be misleading. What if someone does this deliberately to manipulate the stock markets, which is a very real possibility as well? So hence, you can suggest this as a way forward. Maybe Election Commission can mandate this. Through the RPA, it can mandate that exit polls should not get into the number of seats. It should only be about the broad trends, maybe the vote share with a small error margin. So by providing this conclusion, you would have built a good solid answer with a logical flow of thought, and that should be more than sufficient. Just ensure you don't take the names of any parties or any coalitions, not required, right? Don't show any political bias, keep it as neutral as possible. Just stick to the core topic which has been asked in the question. Now let's look at the next important article from page number 13. The article is related to science and technology, and it's a very interesting article. This article is related to the Chang'e 6 lunar mission of China. We discussed this briefly under the Prelims section in one of the previous sessions, if you remember. But today we'll carry out a much more detailed analysis of the topic, as it is very relevant from India's perspective as well. See, China's ambitious lunar mission is named as the Chang'e mission. Just like India has Chandrayaan, ISRO's Chandrayaan mission consists of a series of already completed missions and upcoming missions to the moon. Similarly, China launched its lunar exploration program in the year 2003. The Chinese Lunar Exploration Program was launched by the Chinese National Space Administration, which is the Chinese equivalent of India's ISRO. And since then, China has launched 6 missions to the moon. Chang'e refers to goddess of the moon in Chinese mythology. China has very ambitious plans to explore the moon, and in the coming years, China wants to deploy astronauts on the moon. It wants to set up maybe installations or human habitations if possible, and look at the resources, the mineral resources found on the lunar surface, and consider the exploration of lunar resources. So China has very ambitious plans in that regard, which has even triggered a space race, a new space race with the United States. Even the US is returning back to the moon after a long gap through its Artemis missions. It is tying up with like-minded countries, including India and many other European partners and its allies, to relaunch its lunar mission under the Artemis program. So India, on the other hand, has its own version of lunar program, the Chandrayaan series of missions. Even the European Space Agency is not far behind. Even Russia, Japan have recently attempted lunar missions, and they have many ambitious plans coming up. So in the context of this new lunar race that has begun, the new space race to explore the moon, to reach the moon, it's very important to understand some of the details of China's Chang'e mission, because Chang'e 6 was very unique. The Chang'e 6 mission was designed to focus on the far side of the moon. And by the way, it was a sample return mission. It was a sample return mission from the far side of the moon, which makes it one of the most unique lunar missions. See, under the Chang'e series, China first launched the Chang'e 1 in 2007, through which it only carried out mapping of the lunar surface. Then through Chang'e 2 and 3, it sent orbiters with high-resolution optical cameras and synthetic aperture radars to generate high-resolution images of the lunar surface. Then through Chang'e 4, it attempted a successful landing, and through Chang'e 5, it landed on the near side of the moon. Through the Chang'e 5 mission, China landed on the near side, which is the visible side of the moon from the Earth, and collected samples. It successfully deployed a lander and rover, collected the soil samples, and returned the samples to Earth. So China is many steps ahead of India's Chandrayaan program. India has recently placed a lander and rover through Chandrayaan 3. So we are yet to collect samples and bring the samples back to Earth. In that regard, China is way ahead as far as its lunar program is concerned. So in 2020, China not only succeeded in the Chang'e 5A mission to bring back lunar soil samples, but now it is attempting a much more ambitious mission under Chang'e 6, where it is collecting soil samples from the far side of the moon and it is returning the sample back to Earth. Just a few days ago, the lander module, which had deployed the rover, it collected the soil samples, and the lander lifted off from the lunar surface, and it has docked with the orbiter in the lunar orbit. And from there, the sample is being dispatched back to Earth, and in a few days, by 25th of June, the Chinese Space Agency is going to collect the soil samples and subject the samples to extensive research. But what is so unique about the far side of the moon? You might have heard that many countries are in a rush to explore the south pole of the moon, or to explore the far side of the moon. So there has to be some specific scientific reason. What explains the scientific interest of the global spacefaring community to focus on the south pole of the moon and the far side of the moon? So let's understand this. Many countries are focusing on the south pole of the moon because of its polar ice caps. If you look at India's Chandrayaan 3 and even the latest Japanese mission that followed India's Chandrayaan 3, and also the failed Russian mission as well, right, that was launched parallelly with Chandrayaan 3. All these missions focused on the south pole of the moon. The reason is the presence of water in the form of ice. Polar ice caps present on the south pole could be a potential water source for future astronauts and human habitations. In fact, it was India's Chandrayaan 1 mission in 2008 which confirmed the presence of water on the lunar surface. So there is greater interest from then onwards to explore the South Pole and find traces of polar ice which potentially can be converted into water. That is the reason why the South Pole of the moon is of great interest. Similarly, there is something unique about the far side of the moon. Now, what is the far side and what is the near side of the moon? Let's understand this. If you look at the two images over here, you're looking at the near side and the far side of the moon. Now, when you step out and look at the night sky and take a look at the beautiful moon which is shining down on Earth, you always see one side only, which is this smoother, softer side. Whenever you step out and visually look at the moon, right, this is the only side of the moon, the only hemisphere of the moon which is visible to us, because the moon is in a permanent tidal lock with the Earth. From any point on Earth, at any given point in time, you can only see one side of the moon because there is a tidal lock between the two celestial bodies. So there is one hemisphere of the moon which is permanently hidden from Earth, which is the far side of the moon. Now, many people call it the dark side of the moon, but that's a very incorrect term, right? Because dark side would mean it doesn't receive light. That's not the case. Far side of the moon receives sunlight. So near side and far side is the correct terminology. Many people call it the dark side, which gives a wrong assumption that there is no sunlight here. Please don't use the word dark side of the moon. Near side meaning this is the side of the lunar hemisphere which faces the Earth, which is visible to us all the time. Far side is the other hemisphere of the moon which is not visible from Earth directly. Now, if you look at the terrain of the near side and the far side, it is drastically different. The near side of the moon has a very smooth surface. You have a lot of plains with very few craters and small hillocks and mountain-like structures, but it's largely a smooth surface which is visible from the Earth. But you would have seen the other side. You would have seen images captured by various missions and spacecrafts where you see this kind of terrain filled with craters, hills and mountains and a very undulating terrain, right? And this is the unique terrain that you find on the far side only. Whereas when you compare this with the near side, it's a complete contrast. Now, this is where the scientific curiosity kicks in, the scientific interest kicks in. There has to be few specific reasons why the two hemispheres of the moon are entirely different. The one facing the Earth has a smoother surface. The one facing away from the Earth, which is permanently hidden from the Earth, right, has a very rough terrain. So it's much more difficult to successfully land on the far side. It's easier to execute a safe landing, deploy rovers, collect samples on the near side because of the smoother surface. So in the far side, it's very hard to find a safe landing spot to deploy the lander and the rover and collect samples and come back. It's a incredible mission to achieve a success in landing on the far side of the moon. Now, the possible reason why the terrain is so different could be linked to the very formation of the moon and the Earth and the planetary objects. Scientists believe that when Earth and the moon were getting shaped and formed, right, when planetary objects were getting formed and taking shape in the universe, the tremendous heat released from the Earth could have played a role in shaping the near side of the moon, which was always facing the Earth because it's in a permanent tidal lock with the Earth. So this could be a possible reason. And overall, the thermochemical properties on the far side of the moon could also play a role, which means the composition, the mineral composition on the near side and far side could be different as well. So this is of great interest for space agencies and governments and spacefaring nations. And that is why exploring the far side, landing on the far side, collecting samples from the far side is seen as a priority for the spacefaring countries. Is that clear? Also, the far side can provide a great location for placing a powerful telescope from where you can get an unobstructed view of the entire universe. In fact, India is also working on one such mission. The ISRO is working with the Raman Research Institute to deploy a lunar space telescope on the far side of the moon called Pratush. Please take this down. There could be a prelims question based on this. In one of the future upcoming lunar missions, when India eventually lands on the far side, the goal of ISRO and Raman Research Institute is to place a powerful lunar telescope from where we can observe the rest of the universe. So this is the reason why the far side is of great interest. Is that clear? We never see the far side because it is in a tidal lock. The moon is in a tidal lock with the earth. We always see the near side. And given the rough terrain, such a mission to land on the far side is a complicated mission. And also don't forget, there is no direct line of sight. Since the far side is almost permanently hidden from the earth, there is no direct line of sight which can affect communication. You can't directly communicate, which means you need an orbiter. You need a spacecraft in the lunar orbit. In the lunar orbit that can act as a relay, that can collect the signals from the lander, the rover, relay those signals via this lunar orbiter or a spacecraft which is in the lunar orbit, then relay this back to Earth. So this is what makes such missions all the more complicated. And China has succeeded, and it's very soon it's going to bring back these soil samples that have been collected. And that is why the topic is very important. Now, what kind of question can you expect in mains? Let's look at a practice question. The far side of the moon has always generated a lot of scientific interest. Examine or elucidate. So any such directive can be given with one such statement regarding the far side of the moon. So begin your answer with an introduction. You can observe the trend among spacefaring nations where they are showing a lot of interest in landing on the far side and in exploring the far side. You can give the examples of China's Chang'e mission, the interest of India, NASA, Japan and many other countries to land and explore the far side. This is the trend that we are seeing, which means there is a lot of scientific interest to explore the far side. So first you're setting the context. Then in the body you can explain why the far side of the moon generates this interest and curiosity. Explain the tidal lock between the earth and the moon and how only the near side is always visible from the earth and the far side is permanently hidden. So studying the far side can give a lot of information about planetary formation of the moon, the impact the earth had on the moon during its formative years, the thermochemical properties and composition and the mineral structure of the near and far side. This is of great scientific relevance and potential economic geopolitical significance as well. So that is why countries are so eager to land here and study the far side. But point out the challenges. It's very difficult to land because of the rough terrain, plus there is no direct line of sight. So communication is a challenge. You need a lunar orbiter or a spacecraft in the lunar orbit which can relay the communication. So this makes the mission more challenging. Then finally conclude your answer. You can point out that scientific curiosity is always great, right? That is what takes humanity forward. But you can provide a caution. This should never turn into a space race, a new space race. It should not turn into another geopolitical contest between the global powers. It looks like we are heading towards that. So you can provide a caution over here, urging the countries to collaborate, work with each other. Right now, if you look at the lunar program of China and US, it looks as if they are in a new space race. And India has made its choice by signing the Artemis Accords with the US. So point out that there shouldn't be any kind of a space race because space belongs to humanity. No country, no government can claim sovereignty over it, right? It's part of the global commons. And you can mention that whatever exploration we conduct, irrespective of which country is doing it, it should only fulfill humanity's scientific interest, nothing else. It should not be driven by human greed or the greed of nations for finding resources, for exploring resources. That should not be the primary driving factor. So one such conclusion should be more than sufficient, and it's a very good end to the given question as well. Now, let's look at this important article on page number 13 related to governance. This article is related to the National Health Claim Exchange, which is being launched by the Ministry of Health and IRDAI. This is one of the biggest reforms being introduced with regard to medical insurance, health insurance in the country, which is going to transform the claim process. I'm sure all of you would have faced a lot of hassles when you get admitted in a hospital or when your family or friends, right, when they go through any surgery or procedure or when they are admitted for a few days, right? When you claim insurance, there is a lot of to and fro between your hospital and your insurance provider. Your hospital will delay the entire procedure, right? They may not submit the right bills. They might have overinflated the cost. Your insurance company will ask for more evidence. They might not honor all the claims being made. So it results in a nightmare scenario, and until that happens, the patients are not even discharged. Either you have to pay the money upfront and later claim the reimbursement from the insurance company, or wait there with the patient, causing more misery to the patient who's already suffering from a health situation. So this has become a nightmare in Indian hospitals. This sufficiently discourages people from opting for insurance because of the complications involved in the claim process. I'm sure many of you would have experienced this. If you have, please let me know in the comments what kind of horrors you have faced while claiming health insurance. So the blame lies with not just the hospitals, it lies with the insurance providers and in general the insurance sector as well. So to simplify the entire claim process, a new platform is being introduced, a digital platform called National Health Claim Exchange. And who is establishing this exchange? It is the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in coordination with the regulator of the insurance sector, IRDAI, Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India. So this is a digital platform through which claim process can be simplified and completely digitized. This will cut down the time taken, it will bring in more efficiency, it will optimize the claim process, it will reduce the administrative work on the hospitals. It will reduce the overall time taken for the entire process to be completed, and it will make it seamless and cashless, entirely cashless. So this will benefit the patients and their family members who have opted for insurance, right? This will help in reducing out-of-pocket expenditure, because right now in India, especially in urban India, there is heavy dependency on private healthcare and out-of-pocket expenditure is very high. So quick claim process with efficient handling of the entire claim process would bring down the out-of-pocket expenditure, and it will actually encourage more people to opt for insurance. So this will widen the insurance cover, benefiting the insurance companies as well. It will deepen the coverage of insurance, and it will benefit the insurance industry. Because right now, if you look at medical insurance alone, it accounts for 29% of the general insurance premium which is collected across the country in a single year. If you take all the general insurance, the premium amount which is paid, 29% of it, which is very significant, is coming just from medical insurance. If we can increase this further, penetrate medical insurance across the country, even into rural areas, right, that could immensely benefit the people. It could improve access to healthcare, make it more affordable, and reduce the out-of-pocket expenditure. Now, this would apply for government-run insurance programs as well. For example, India runs the world's biggest insurance program, Ayushman Bharat, which is administered by the National Health Authority. Especially in rural areas and urban poor, they depend heavily on government-run insurance schemes, but even there, people are facing a lot of problems in the claim process. Either hospitals make mistakes, or insurance companies, the managers, or who are administering the scheme, right, they falter. And this is largely due to the lack of a process and lack of digitization in the insurance industry and in the claim process in general. So that is where the National Health Claim Exchange is going to make a big difference. It's going to disrupt the insurance industry. This is like the UPI for digital payments. How UPI disrupted digital payments and created a common platform. On something similar lines, the NHCX, National Health Claim Exchange, would become a centralized hub. It would be a one-stop platform to handle all the insurance claims, to process and disperse the payments as well. So this will bring together the healthcare providers, the hospitals, the patients, of course, who hold insurance policies, then the private insurance companies, and as well as the government agencies which are managing insurance programs like Ayushman Bharat. So all the stakeholders will be integrated on this digital platform. Is that clear? So this would become a very simplified process. See, right now, hospitals, they have to apply on different websites, different portals for each insurance provider, which is a very cumbersome process. Right? Each company follows its own standards. They expect a certain kind of standardization. And every time this leads to problems in the processing of these claims. With a single universal centralized hub, with just one portal for all insurance claims, The process will get simplified. It will reduce the administrative burden on the hospitals, right? Hospitals are meant to focus on providing health care, not in processing papers and claims. Similarly, for insurance companies, quick dispersal will benefit them because more people will have faith in insurance. It will widen the coverage. It will benefit the patients. It will benefit the government, right? It will bring more efficiency in the insurance industry, and it will reduce the out-of-pocket expenditure for patients in the country. So with this ambitious goal, the National Health Claim Exchange is being launched to fulfill the goal of IRDAI, which is to ensure that there is insurance for all by 2047. This is the goal of IRDAI. Ensure that there is medical health insurance for all people in the country by 2047. So this goal can be realized with National Health Claim Exchange, which will make it a seamless, paperless, cashless process. And this is going to bring in more efficiency in the entire process. In fact, the Health Ministry is setting a strict time limit as well for processing of claims. Once this exchange becomes completely operational, within 3 hours of receiving the discharge request from the hospital, the concerned insurance provider will have to clear the claim. So a strict time limit is being set, and also financial incentives are being offered to hospitals to adopt this new platform. You need to encourage adoption as well, right? You need to encourage more hospitals, more insurance companies to switch to the new platform. So financial incentives are being offered to them. The National Health Authority has announced that those hospitals which are going to switch to this digital platform, they will get an incentive of up to 500 rupees per claim, or 10% of the claim amount, whichever is lower. It might be a very small amount, but given the total number of insurance claims processed, it could be quite significant for a particular hospital, and it could actually be a positive incentive, right? That could drive hospitals to adopt the platform and thus streamline and simplify the claim process. So this is one of the big reforms that India is introducing in the insurance sector. Of course, there will be challenges in the implementation, from the adoption, digital literacy, to the overall handling of the claim process. There will be a lot of challenges, but if well implemented, this can have tremendous benefits. It can ensure better success of Ayushman Bharat, which will primarily benefit the poor population and the rural patients who are heavily dependent on government offered insurance schemes. It will drive even the urban population to opt for more insurance, thus increasing insurance coverage, right? And it could overall bring down out-of-pocket expenditure. So there can be many benefits that arise out of this. So if you're aware of all these pointers and the analysis behind it, I think you should be able to tackle any question, be it prelims or mains question. Now let's look at the fourth article. The fourth article is related to international relations. Now in just another 1.5 hours, the swearing-in ceremony is all set to take place, where the Prime Minister, PM Modi, is going to take oath for the third consecutive time, and the NDA will be forming the government in just a short time. So in this swearing-in ceremony, which is being held on a large scale, you might have noticed that several foreign dignitaries have been invited. In fact, Prime Minister Modi has almost made this a regular habit, a regular practice, to invite certain specific leaders to send out a symbolic message to those governments, to those leaders, regarding India's priority in its foreign policy. If you remember, in 2014, when PM Modi assumed power for the first time, right, when BJP secured a majority and formed the government in 2014, all the leaders from the neighborhood were invited. The leaders of Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal and Bhutan, and even the leaders of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Nawaz Sharif was the Prime Minister back then in 2014, and Hamid Karzai was the President of Afghanistan back then, when Afghanistan still had a civilian government. So all these South Asian leaders were invited. South Asia was the focus in 2014, and even the leader of Mauritius was invited, because India shares deep-rooted connections with Mauritius. The leaders of all these countries were invited, and PM Modi used the opportunity to launch a new direction in our foreign policy, which was the launch of Neighbourhood First policy of India. See, historically, since 1947, our immediate neighborhood has always been a priority in our diplomacy. But for the first time, India was bringing out a specific doctrine, a specific approach in our foreign policy to give topmost priority to our immediate neighbors. So by inviting all the SAARC leaders, along with the leader of Mauritius, the message that was sent out was that the new government is going to prioritize India's relations with all the immediate neighbors. So we saw an immediate improvement in our ties with Bangladesh, with Sri Lanka, Nepal and Bhutan, and even with Pakistan. A very good chemistry started building between PM Modi and PM Nawaz Sharif. And India-Pakistan did get closer for a couple of years before the relations were derailed through a series of terror attacks. So neighborhood first policy was initially seen as a big success, but later there were some shortcomings as well. In 2019, when PM Modi won the elections again and brought back his government, this time, again few foreign dignitaries were invited, but the focus was the BIMSTEC group of countries, not the SAARC group of countries. Because by 2019, the equation between India-Pakistan had completely changed. Is that clear? Following the Uri attacks and later the Pulwama attacks and India's retaliation through surgical strikes and Balkot airstrikes, our relations had completely collapsed with Pakistan and India had started sidelining, isolating Pakistan. In fact, in 2016, we boycotted the SAARC summit. And instead of SAARC, we started prioritizing BIMSTEC, which is focused on the Bay of Bengal region. It brings the littorals of Bay of Bengal together. So during the 2019 swearing-in ceremony, some of the neighborhood countries from South Asia and the BIMSTEC countries were prioritized for the invite, which essentially was a reflection of our neighborhood first policy in combination with the Act East policy of India. So leaders from Bangladesh, Maldives, Nepal, Bhutan were invited, but Pakistan and Afghanistan were excluded. Because in Afghanistan as well, things had started to take a turn, where Taliban was being resurgent at that point in time. So few South Asian leaders were invited in 2019 with few Southeast Asian leaders, including the leader of Myanmar, sending out a strong signal to the Bay of Bengal region and even to Southeast Asia that India would be prioritizing the Act East policy on par with the neighborhood first policy, which means we were giving more attention to our extended neighborhood as well. So this time, in 2024, when PM Modi will be sworn in for the third time in just about 1.5 hours, you will witness that there are again few South Asian leaders invited, plus leaders of few Indian Ocean countries from the Indian Ocean region. So this time, India has chosen to invite the Sri Lankan leader, Ranil Wickremesinghe, and of course, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina from Bangladesh is a regular invitee. Then Seychelles from the Indian Ocean has been invited and it will be represented by its Vice President. Then the leader of Mauritius, Praveen Kumar Jagannath. Leaders of Nepal and Bhutan, Prachanda from Nepal, Pushpa Kamal Dahal, who heads a coalition government in Nepal, and the recently elected Shering Tobe from Bhutan. These South Asian leaders would be present along with Mohammad Muizzu, the president of Maldives, which is very interesting. So if you look at the current mix of invites that have been sent out to global leaders, it clearly signals a shift in India's approach again, which means we are focusing on South Asia plus Indian Ocean region. It's a promotion of neighborhood first policy along with the Sagar doctrine that was launched by Prime Minister Modi in 2015. Sagar stands for security and growth for all countries in the region. This is a doctrine India has been following towards all the Indian Ocean countries, towards the extended neighborhood. So, by inviting leaders of South Asia and Indian Ocean countries, we are sending out a signal, a symbolic gesture that in the coming term, priority would be our immediate neighborhood, these specific countries in South Asia, along with some Indian Ocean countries. So, invite extended to Mohammad Muizzu of Maldives is very interesting, and the Maldivian president has accepted the invite as well. So, he's already in Delhi, all set to take part in the swearing-in. Now, this comes at a crucial point because India-Maldives relations had taken a hit after Mohammad Muizzu became the president last year. Mohammad Muizzu has been seen as a pro-China leader, anti-India leader. Some of his controversial statements, his controversial actions against Indian interests had led to friction between India and Maldives. Usually, Maldivian leaders visit India first after getting elected. But Mohammad Muizzu chose to go to Turkey and China instead of visiting India. Plus, he ordered India to remove all the troops that were stationed in Maldives and to take back the military equipment that India had gifted to Maldives. So this led to a lot of friction. Plus, when PM Modi promoted Lakshadweep as a parallel tourism destination, it led to a backlash from Maldives that triggered a social media outrage from India that has completely derailed India-Maldives relationship. Plus, Mohammad Muizzu has visited China, signed some key agreements. China is making some large investments, taking over strategic projects. So this represents a significant challenge for Indian interests in the Indian Ocean. And given this development where Mohammad Muizzu has been invited by the new government and he has accepted the invite to be part of the swearing in, it could represent a significant change of heart, and it could represent a change as well in India-Maldives relationship. Because Maldives depends on India eventually. Recently, it has faced a economic crisis. It's going through a few other challenges, including a water shortage. And it depends heavily on India for all these problems. And especially the tourist inflow from India has been a significant part of Maldives' revenue. So Mohammad Muizzu might have realized his initial outburst and ill thought out reaction against India. Now he might be trying to correct his approach as well. And it also shows a mature handling on India's part. Without retaliation, without turning this into a zero-sum game, India-Maldives are appearing to handle this issue more maturely. And this could mark a new beginning in India-Maldives relationship. So that is why the swearing-in is a very closely watched event, along with the political significance. Right? There is a geopolitical significance attached to it over the last 3 terms, because under Prime Minister Modi, this practice has been developed where foreign dignitaries are also invited, and whom we invite tells a lot about the priorities of India in its foreign policy. Now let's quickly take a look at the prelim section. Let's look at some of the small articles and then we can wrap up the session for today. On the front page, we have an article that refers to leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha. According to the article, the Congress, which is the second largest party following the election results after the BJP, it has secured 99 seats. And the party has passed a resolution. It has adopted a resolution asking its leader Rahul Gandhi to stake claim as the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha. Now this is a very, very big development. Because for the last 2 Lok Sabha terms, there was no leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha. Because to become a leader of opposition of the Lok Sabha, there is a criteria. The criteria is that the party which is claiming the post, which is the second largest party with the second largest number of seats, should have secured a minimum of 10% of the total seats in the Lok Sabha. Out of the 543 seats that we have in the Lok Sabha, at least 55 seats have to be secured by the second largest party. But in the last 2 Lok Sabhas, the Congress or no other party managed to get that number, and as a result, there was no leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha. Only for certain matters with regard to certain key appointments to constitutional bodies and statutory bodies, the leader of the next largest party was seen as the representative on behalf of leader of opposition. Because the leader of opposition is a recognized role. It comes with its own set of powers and privileges. So leader of opposition, this role is defined under the Salaries and Allowances of Leader of Opposition in Parliament Act of 1977. There is a leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, leader of opposition in the Rajya Sabha as well. If you look at the order of precedence, right, they are given a rank of a cabinet minister, equivalent to that of a cabinet minister. Now, this is very significant. They play a critical role in the parliamentary process. In the conduct of business in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, leader of opposition in both the houses, they play a crucial role. Be it supplying of the official documents, the constitution and the functioning of parliamentary committees, allocation of seats and rooms, and the overall conduct of legislative business and the deliberation within the parliament. The leader of opposition plays a key role. And more importantly, the leader of opposition sits on various important selection and appointment committees, which appoints key officials to constitutional bodies and statutory bodies, such as the CBI, the Central Vigilance Commission, the Central Information Commission, National Human Rights Commission, and now even the Election Commission. So, in the last 2 Lok Sabhas, there was no leader of opposition. So as a result, the leader of the next largest party was seen as the leader of the opposition, but without the rank of a cabinet minister, without some of the rights, powers and privileges. But now that the Congress has secured 99 seats, which is above the 10% limit, there would be an official leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, and this is very good for the health of our democracy. This would strengthen the opposition. The opposition now has significant numbers, right? Close to 230 plus seats, which could help in reining in the ruling party and keep a check on the executive. Those checks and balances, pulls and pressures are very critical in a democracy, and thus the leader of opposition, right, the office, this role becomes very crucial. Next, a small development related to the Gaza war. We have this article on page 15, according to which the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has approached the UN Security Council and added the names of Israel and Hamas to the global list of offenders who are committing human rights violations against minor children. In the Gaza conflict, more than 36,000 people have been killed already, right, including the attack that Hamas carried out. Easily 37,000 plus people have been killed, and a vast majority of them are young children. This has triggered massive outrage already regarding the violation of children's rights, be it what Hamas did on October 7th or what Israel has done later through its disproportionate use of force. Through its targeting of civilian areas, hundreds and thousands of children have been killed and injured, which represents a gross violation of children's rights and human rights. So the United Nations maintains a global list of those countries or non-state actors who commit gross violation against children's rights. It could be a state actor or it could be non-state actors. They are all listed on this global list, and accordingly the UN Security Council can act against them. It can place sanctions on them. It can take some kind of international action to ensure that there is pressure on these state or non-state actors who are responsible for violation of children's rights. So into this global list, the UN Secretary General has listed both Israel and Hamas, thus designating them as offenders, global offenders, with regard to causing harm to children. Previously, Russia was listed in the context of the Ukraine war, and also the Kachin Independence Army from Myanmar, from our neighboring country, which is accused of targeting children from rival ethnic groups, has also been listed on this global list. So, based on this, UNSC can act. But problem is that UNSC is always biased, because the P5 members, the 5 permanent members, they hold the most powerful vote at the UN, the veto. And based on their geopolitical inclinations, some permanent member or the other will cast the veto, and usually no such action is taken against the perpetrators of this violence. But at least listing these global offenders is significant, because it exposes their brutal use of force, their aggression. It brings international pressure, diplomatic pressure, which might help in pushing back these state or non-state actors who might be causing harm to children, especially in conflict zones. Coming to the last article from Environment and Ecology, on the supplement section, the Hindu carries the image of this unique, majestic bird species, the greater adjutant stork. Historically, this particular species of stork was found across Asia and Africa. But today, the Asian subspecies is very restricted, limited, found in very few habitats, and its population has declined massively. This bird is hunted for its meat. There's a lot of superstition associated with the meat of the bird, because these are scavengers. They scavenge on garbage, rotting material, etc. They are often seen with a lot of taboo and stigma. But in certain communities, it is quite revered because of all the superstition attached with it. And there is a demand in the black market for the meat of the bird, plus the destruction of habitat, right? And the overall destruction of biodiversity has led to a drastic reduction in the population of the greater adjutant stork. Urbanization in particular has been held responsible, which has led to large-scale deforestation. Now, on the IUCN Red List, the greater adjutant stork found in India, it is listed as endangered. On the IUCN Red List, the adjutant stork is listed as one of the threatened species, listed as endangered on the IUCN Red List. Please note this down. Now, we can find the greater adjutant stork in one particular habitat in India. It's now restricted to the state of Assam in the Brahmaputra Valley. You have a very important wetland, the Deepor Wildlife Sanctuary, which is a Ramsar site. It's a wetland of international importance, recognized under the Ramsar Convention. This is one of the last remaining habitats of the greater adjutant stork. Apart from this, there is one other habitat in Asia. Now, that is a small exercise for you. It's an assignment for you. Find out which is the last remaining habitat in Asia. I'll give you a clue. It's in Southeast Asia. Apart from the Brahmaputra Valley in Assam, the Deepor Wildlife Sanctuary, there's one more place in Southeast Asia where greater adjutant stork is found in decent numbers. Since it's an endangered species on the IUCN Red List, the last remaining habitats can be important for your prelims. So please find out where else it is found in Southeast Asia and mention that in the comments below. So on this note, I would like to conclude the discussion for today. I hope it's been a good, interesting session, and I hope you've understood all the topics that we have discussed. If you benefited from the session, do let me know in the comments. Don't forget to support us with your likes. That is what keeps us going. It motivates us to do better for you. And do subscribe to the channel. So join me live in another 45 minutes at 7 p.m. as we start the last lab session. And I'm going to discuss some very important conventions, treaties, protocols, agreements, which could be very important for the upcoming prelims. So see you again at 7 p.m. Till then, take care. Have a good day.